From a distance, it looks like something you'd see in a display case. Polished metal, gold details, and an engraved horse, a sign of prestige. But on the frontier out west, that shine hid something serious. Revolvers made to settle a fight in seconds. To understand how life changed out there, we're going beyond the movie Colts and remembering the models that brought more shots, faster reloading, and a surprise in range. So, who stayed standing? Number 15, Colt Walker, the hand cannon that changed how people looked at a shootout. In 1847, riding the momentum of the Mexican-American War, the Texas Rangers wanted a gun that would end things fast, especially in a fight on horseback. Captain Samuel H. Walker got straight to the point when he went to Samuel Colt. He needed a revolver with enough power to drop a man, and even a horse, at something like 100 yards. The answer came out too big to wear on a belt. Its place was in a holster strapped to the saddle on the side of the mount. The Colt Walker was .44 caliber and could take a heavy powder charge for the standards of the time, closer to what a lot of people today would call a magnum than a regular revolver. That shook up tactics in the Old West. Instead of relying on a single-shot rifle with slow reloading, the Ranger had 6 shots ready. In more than one case, just the sound of metal and the sight of the cylinder coming out of the holster already changed the vibe of the showdown. But too much power comes with a price. With over-the-top loads, some parts failed, and there were Rangers who ended the fight with hot shrapnel flying near their hand. Even so, the Walker became a benchmark. For a short period, it was the kind of gun that made the frontier respect the silence before the first shot. Soon after came more practical models, but the legend of the hand cannon was already written on the plains. Number 14, the European Invader, Le Faucheux pinfire revolver. In the American West, a French revolver started making the rounds that broke the mold of the old loose powder systems. The Le Faucheux pinfire used a complete brass cartridge. Powder, primer, and bullet all came together, and a side pin set it off. Sounds like a small thing, but it was a game changer. Instead of measuring a charge, ramming in a ball, and setting a cap, the shooter just spun the cylinder and loaded ready-to-go cartridges. In a saloon fight or an ambush, that could decide who got the first shot off. Some of these revolvers made it to the U.S. around the time of the Civil War with officers and travelers, and later ended up on the regular market, pawn shops, gunsmith counters, and eventually in the holster of people living on the road between Kansas and Texas. Having a Le Faucheux was like having a mechanical edge. Fewer steps, more shots before the other guy could get set. But the exposed pin came with a price. A fall off a horse, a hit against the saddle, or sloppy handling could smack the pin and fire the cartridge at the wrong time, right near your body. That flaw helped push the next shift. Rimfire cartridges and then center fire, with nothing sticking out to snag. The Le Faucheux opened the door and also showed what needed fixing. Number 13, Beaumont Adams. When pulling the trigger became no time to think. In the middle of the 19th century, most revolvers in the West still required that whole routine: cock the hammer, aim, fire, and repeat. Then a British model started showing up, brought in by a few guys with money and connections, and it changed the pace of a fight. The Beaumont Adams was double action. You just pulled the trigger and the cylinder lined up the next shot. In a showdown on Main Street, someone with a single-action Colt was still getting the second shot ready, while the Adams had already let off 2 more. In a saloon fight, with people bumping into you, tables flipping, and smoke in the air, that 1 second less was what separated walking out or getting carried out. The rapid-fire sound also messed with people's heads. A lot of folks thought there was more than one shooter and dove behind the bar before they could even react right. Of course, it wasn't magic. The heavy trigger tired your hand out, and the gun wasn't easy to find around here. Still, anyone who got one figured it out fast. Speed and surprise were worth almost as much as accuracy. And soon, an inventor doctor would take that idea of more shots, faster, to a level nobody in the West had ever seen. Number 12, LeMat, the 2-in-1 that caught a lot of people off guard. Around 1855 in New Orleans, the French doctor Jean-Alexandre LeMat figured a half-dozen shots wasn't enough once things got up close. The idea was simple: a cylinder with 9 chambers for pistol rounds, and in the center, a smooth-bore barrel loaded with shot, kind of like a shotgun. You fired it like a revolver, and when the other guy swore you were done, there were still 3 more. With a little switch on the hammer, you could flip to the center barrel and dump the whole load at once. In the Civil War, the LeMat showed up on the Confederate side, mainly with cavalry officers who wanted a Plan B, without having to swap guns in the saddle. A lot of them were made outside the U.S. and got into the South through smuggling routes that dodged the naval blockade, which only added to the talk around the gun. J.E.B. Stuart is one of the names tied to it, and General P.G.T. Beauregard helped push the project along. After the conflict, a few ended up circulating among civilians, more for the edge and the saloon story than for practicality. The downside was obvious: heavy, finicky mechanics and black powder gunking everything up fast. Even so, the LeMat became a snapshot of the era. 2 ideas in one gun, built to buy seconds when seconds meant life. Number 11, Colt Navy, 1851. When 6 shots changed the frontier, out on the American frontier, before metallic cartridges became the standard, the Colt Navy 1851 became a lot of people's go-to. It was a percussion revolver, built to work in the real world. You loaded it carefully, putting powder, a lead ball, and a percussion cap into each chamber. By today's standards, it's a hassle, but back then the payoff was huge. 6 shots in a row in a gun that fit in a holster and didn't get in the way on horseback. The .36 caliber delivered a balance. A sheriff, a Texas Ranger, or even a guy making his living gambling in a saloon understood fast control, manageable recoil, and useful range. The long barrel helped with aiming, and the well-balanced weight made the gun settle when you brought it up to shoot. There's a detail a lot of people miss. On the cylinder, the engraving of the Battle of Campeche was a reminder that it wasn't just a brawling tool, it was a product of a time when war and the street blended together. Wild Bill Hickok helped put the model on the map by carrying 2, but its reputation really came from everyday use. Reliable, easy to maintain, and accurate enough to decide a confrontation in seconds. And then comes the shift. When the West started demanding more power and faster reloading, the Navy showed the limits of the .36 and made room for Colt's next generation. Number 10, Colt 1860, Army, when the talking stopped. At the start of the Civil War, a lot of people on the Union side already knew the Colt Navy, but they wanted something that would really stop someone. Colt answered with the 1860 Army, 44 caliber, still black powder and percussion cap, with 6 shots. For a historian, it marks a turning point. A handgun meant for open field fighting, not just bar brawls. In the cavalry, the message was simple. You could hit a target before he got close. It wasn't magic. It was more energy behind the bullet and a well-balanced setup, easy to point even on the move. On campaign, that turned into a kind of currency. Soldiers trusted it, officers requested it, and the enemy respected it when they saw the cylinder spin. After the war, it headed west along with veterans and settlers. On trails and ranches, it worked for hunting and mainly for defense when you couldn't count on anyone nearby. Years later, many were converted to metallic cartridges so they wouldn't fall behind. But that same long barrel that helped you aim got in the way of a quick draw. When more compact models took over, the 1860 became the old reliable, heavy on the belt, but when it showed up, everyone got the message. Number 9, Colt Lightning, when being fast became a real advantage. Late 19th century. In a lot of frontier towns, a bump in the saloon could turn into a shootout in seconds. So Colt launched the 1877 model in '38, which got the nickname Lightning. A lot of people mix the names up. The 41 version was the Thunderer, and there was also the 32, the Rainmaker. Sounds like weather, but it stuck. The main point was the double-action mechanism. No need to cock the hammer for every shot. You pull the trigger, it cocks and drops, and the next one is already coming. It was the kind of revolver that stayed discreet in a holster and came out fast. For a sheriff, a deputy, or a guy on the road that took one step out of the process. At a card table, it also created an edge nobody wanted to deal with. It had a solid frame and a side-loading gate to feed cartridges one by one, standard for the time, but the pace stayed steadier than a lot of single-action guns. It wasn't magic. The trigger was heavy, and without practice, your aim went out the window. And the 1877 had small parts. Dust and black powder meant you had to clean it, or you'd get malfunctions. It got its reputation because the Lightning taught a simple lesson. In the Old West, the strongest guy didn't always win. More often, it was the one who could get the first and second shots off without wasting time. Number 8, Smith & Wesson, Model 3, when reloading became part of the plan. In the Old West, a lot of people still wasted time pushing ammo into the cylinder one by one, old-school style. The Model 3 showed up with a trick that was a real game-changer back then. You pop the latch, the barrel tips down, all 6 empty cases kick out at once. You drop in a fresh set of 44 American metal cartridges, snap it shut, and you're done. For anyone running escort, patrol, or riding through rough country, those seconds mattered. And sometimes they were the difference between making it home or becoming a story in the saloon. Its story starts far from the West, a big military order from the Russian Empire, which wanted fast reloads even with gloves on and brutal cold. That design crossed the Atlantic and ended up in the hands of people who needed something practical, not something fancy. Sheriffs, cowboys, explorers. The metal cartridge packed powder, primer, and bullet into one unit, cutting down on the common failures of older systems. It had enough punch to drop cattle and end a short fight. The catch was maintenance. The top brake mechanism depended on tight, well-fitted parts, and that was tough, far from a workshop. That's why veterans sometimes carried a backup gun, not to show off, but as mechanical insurance. Number 7, Remington New Model Army, the West's sledgehammer revolver. In the early 1860s, a lot of people out west and in the Army looked at Colt and thought, okay, can we make it stronger? Remington answered with the New Model Army, a .44 black powder revolver with a solid frame, top strap, built like one solid block. Instead of the open top setup common on a lot of Colts, here the cylinder sits surrounded by metal. That handled heavy loads better and kept the barrel lined up with less wiggle, helping accuracy shot after shot. During the Civil War, it earned a reputation because it could take dirty work. Dust on the road, rain in camp, mud in the holster. Later, as the frontier pushed on, that same argument worked for scouts, sheriffs, and bounty hunters, and it had a trick veterans love to talk about. By pulling the cylinder pin, you could swap in another preloaded cylinder a lot faster than filling chambers one by one in the middle of the chaos. The cost showed up in your gear, more weight on your belt, and a cleanup that took patience. Still, for anyone who needed a revolver that worked when the bet was their own skin, this Remington became a trusted pick, and it set the stage for the next monster. Number 6, Colt Dragoon, the hand cannon of the horseback era. When people think of big 19th century revolvers, a lot of them think of the Colt Walker. But back in the day, Colt had already put out a beast built for dragoons, the heavy cavalry, the dragoon. It was big, heavy, and meant to ride on the saddle, not in your pocket. A true hand cannon, .44 caliber, a big cylinder, and a long barrel that helped tame recoil and keep your shot steady. In the Mexican-American War, it shows up as a shock tool. In a horse charge, the idea was simple. Get close, make space, and break the other side's nerve. It wasn't just the hit of the shot. It was that sharp crack echoing across open ground, the sound that said, "This just got serious." Outside the Army, the dragoon traveled with hunters, stagecoach drivers, and people crossing the border, out there where there was no help nearby. In places without a shop or spare parts, toughness was worth gold. Handling dust, rain, and hard use made a difference. But everything has a cost. Loading, drawing, and reloading was slow and tiring. As the West changed, more practical and faster guns won out. The dragoon became a marker of a phase, when being armed often meant being mounted. Number 5. Merwin, Hulbert & Co., the revolver that changed the whole idea of reloading. In the late 19th century Old West, when your cylinder ran dry, every second became a problem. Merwin, Hulbert & Co. entered the conversation with a system that, to a lot of people back then, sounded like no kidding. Instead of opening the standard way, you'd twist the assembly and pull the barrel forward. In that move, the gun spit out only the fired cases. The live rounds stayed put. The logic was simple: top off what was missing and keep going, without wasting ammo. Not by accident, the .44-40 became a popular pick, the same cartridge used in Winchester rifles. One belt fed both the handgun and the long gun. Less stuff, less chance of mixing calibers, and more everyday practicality. That design also helped with accuracy, because the barrel-to-frame lockup was tight when it closed. But it came with a price. Small parts needed cleaning, and if a spring went bad far from a big town, you fixed it the hard way. Still, it's easy to see why sheriffs and bounty hunters caught on fast. It was a smart way to save time when time was everything. And it says a lot about how innovation happened the hard way. Number 4. Colt Buntline Special, the gun that became a story. In the Old West, a revolver with a 12-inch barrel got attention. The Colt, called the Buntline Special, felt like part sidearm, part short carbine. The logic was straightforward. With more barrel, the .45 Colt load had more time to burn, which could mean a little more speed, a longer sight line, and steadier shots at a certain distance, useful in a showdown on an open street. But its fame came more from stories than from steel. The name Buntline is tied to the writer Ned Buntline and the rumor that he ordered or gifted long-barreled versions to famous lawmen. Wyatt Earp sits at the top of that list, with Dodge City and Tombstone. The sources don't line up perfectly, and a lot of it may have been saloon talk. Even so, the maybe kept the model alive. In practice, the long barrel came with a cost. Drawing was slower, the holster had to be different, and a coat or poncho could snag. In a bar, a narrow doorway, or a hallway, the barrel tip gave away your position. That's why it made sense in planned situations, with time to aim, not in split-second reactions. The Buntline Special leaves a lesson from the West. Sometimes the legend is born when a common tool gets pushed to the limit, and someone knows when to use it and when to put it away. Number 3, the Colt, Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. After the Civil War, a lot of towns out west lived on the edge. Trains rolling in, cattle drives passing through, easy money, and a fight always around the corner. In 1873, Colt released the Single Action Army, a 6-shooter that became the go-to sidearm, often in .45 Colt. It wasn't the first revolver, but it nailed it. Simple build, solid in the hand, and able to keep working through dust, rain, and hard knocks without complaining. How it operated mattered too. For every shot, you cock the hammer, hear the cylinder lock with that click, and you know from there, it's not much about show. In a place where the sheriff might be miles away, just a hand going to the holster could change the whole mood in the saloon. The legend grew with names like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, but what kept the myth alive was everyday use. Ranchers, train guards, shopkeepers, and outlaws all bet on the same mechanism, easy to maintain and easy to fix. And each owner set it up for the job. Short barrel for a quick draw, long barrel for range, walnut grips, or mother of pearl. On the frontier, this Colt became a clear message about control when the law still showed up late. And by the time Hollywood showed up, it was already a character. Number 2, the Schofield, the revolver that became an advantage in the saddle. After the Civil War, the U.S. Army cavalry needed a sidearm that worked when everything went wrong. Dust, gloves, a nervous horse, and no time. That's where the Smith & Wesson Schofield, a variation of the Model 3 tied to Major George Schofield, made its way in alongside and often ahead of the Colt Single Action Army, the Peacemaker. The point was simple: reload fast without losing control of the situation. With the Schofield, you popped the top latch and the gun opened up. An extractor pushed all 6 empty cases out at once. Instead of picking out one case at a time, the cavalryman could shove in fresh cartridges, snap it shut, and keep moving. For someone on horseback, that could be the difference between holding the line and getting swallowed up at close range. It also kicked off a logistics headache. The .45 Schofield was shorter and would fit in a Colt, but the reverse didn't work, and that messed with depots and patrols. Outside the fort, its reputation spread fast. When the talk was, "I need something that reloads quick," its name came up. In the end, the Schofield wasn't just a gun, It was a lesson in speed, maintenance, and supply in a West where mistakes were expensive. Number 1. The pair, 2 revolvers, 1 plan. When people talk about the Old West, a lot of folks think of one famous revolver. But in newspaper reports and first-hand accounts from the time, what really scared people was seeing a guy show up with 2 identical guns, 1 in each hand. It wasn't a circus trick, it was math. Instead of stopping to reload, he could keep the pace while the other guy tried to do the math on the shots. Men like Wild Bill Hickok and John Wesley Hardin practiced it for hours because the hard part wasn't just pulling 2 triggers, it was keeping control, using the right holsters, a lot of them cross-draw on the belt, swapping the gun that was dry without thinking, and not losing your aim when the dust kicked up and your heart started racing. And there were still cartridge failures, jams, sweaty hands, details almost nobody talks about in the movies. Not everyone had the money or the skill for that, so the pair became a sign. This guy's been through trouble and doesn't want to rely on luck. In a duel, that half-second pause was what separated making it back to the ranch or becoming a footnote. And there was the psychological side. 2 barrels pointed at you changed the conversation before the first shot. Sometimes the standoff ended right there, no bravado, because the message was clear. The guy came prepared.